laws are enforced by the courts, and whatever one thinks about them, in themselves, they can only be used, not abused.
The consequence of getting a writ is that newspaper immediately plunge into really quite enormous expenses. The thing doesn't get to court, and people say, but it never got to court. But it's just the basis of having to defend a writ before you get to court. Knowing pretty well that Maxwell may very well have walked away sort of 2 years into the action. But by that time, you're into £20,000–30,000 worth of legal costs. So there's a considerable advantage in not writing those stories.
But one or two reporters still thought the story deserved to be told. 4 years ago, Tom Bower chanced his arm by writing a critical biography. In the early 70s, Bower had made a BBC documentary about Maxwell, who was then in disgrace after being judged unfit to run a public company by the Department of Trade and Industry. The film presented him as a tycoon in the tradition of Citizen Kane.
Many times in our island history have men from distant lands come to settle here and ended by making their mark on our society. But few immigrant stories have been more remarkable than that of Ian Robert Maxwell, patriot, politician, and tycoon extraordinary.
Citizen Maxwell hated it. "15 years later, Maxwell made desperate efforts to stop anyone reading Tom Bower's book. The man who'd won a military cross for courage in the Second World War now seemed to be terrified of a single unarmed author.
Maxwell was determined that the Sunday Times shouldn't serialise my book, because that would give the book an endorsement, it would give it authority, it would give it enormous widespread coverage. So he repeatedly rang up Rupert Murdoch, insisting that the book was libelous, although he hadn't even read it, let alone seen the cover. And after a time, Murdoch became weary of the calls and passed it on to Andrew Neil, the editor. Neil, to his credit, just stuck his heels in and said, "Look, I've bought it. I'm not going to be bullied."
Maxwell even issued a writ against his former secretary, Anne Robertson, accusing her and Bower of breach of confidence. This was after Bower had taken her out to lunch while researching his book.
Now, when we left the restaurant, her handbag was open. She's an old lady. I said to her, "Look, your handbag's open, you must be careful." So she gave me some papers to hold while she closed her bag and went on her way. Months later, when the documents came through on discovery of the basis of Maxwell's writ against me for breach of confidence, it was clear that the handing over of secret documents was the evidence which he said proved that there was a breach of confidence. So in other words, he'd had a detective watching us at this lunch.
While he was busy monitoring Tom Bower's lunches, maybe he should have kept a closer eye on one of his own executives, Peter Thompson, who, having left Maxwell's employ, co-wrote an alternative unauthorised biography. This book annoyed him even more than Bower's.
The book came out in February, and Maxwell was on his boat, the Lady Ghislaine, in the Caribbean, and it came as something of a surprise to his people in London. It suddenly arrived. They heard the book was out in the shops, and half a dozen copies were quickly dispatched to the office, to Mirror Group newspapers, and it was faxed page by page to Robert Maxwell on his yacht. It took them most of the night to do it, and of course he was getting increasingly annoyed as he was reading each page as it came off the fax.
As soon as they felt the full wrath of Robert Maxwell, the publishers retreated. They promised to withdraw the book and remove all the so-called libels. The two authors didn't have much choice but to go along with this deal.
The writs were coming in at the rate of 3 or 4 a day. In the end, there was a total of 30 writs, and a judge had to set a deadline for the number of writs to come in. I spoke to Tony Delano, and he said, if we don't sign, the book is probably dead. This way we get a paperback out. So I agreed to the out-of-court settlement. He didn't like anything about the KGB. He didn't like any suggestion that he was a dishonest businessman. He didn't like any suggestion that he was deceitful. He felt that this would damage himself and his companies. And we amended the text, and in fact we were able to include and update certain things because we were having a go at a new version of the book.
The new version was published. Maxwell still wasn't happy.
The publishers rang me and said, "You won't believe this, but he's issued another injunction." And the publishers had in fact included on the back cover of the book a short piece saying that this was the almost complete story of Robert Maxwell. And he argued that this meant that what had been left out of the book would be the complete story, and therefore we were saying that what had been cut out was in fact true, which he said was a breach of the legal agreement.
So the book was withdrawn yet again, and it didn't reappear until after Maxwell's death. This was partly because the publishers weren't prepared to finance an extended appeal, but Maxwell also piled on the pressure by extending his threats to booksellers.
Bang, bang.
What Maxwell did in relation to the Bauer book was amazing. He tried to stop all booksellers from distributing the book.
He scattered threats of legal action around like confetti. All the major bookshops, all the wholesalers were warned that if they handled Maxwell, The Portrait of Power, they would be sued for libel.
Some booksellers complied and refused to sell the offending biographies. Others were more robust.
We kept the book on sale, and I think by the end we were pretty well the only bookseller in Britain to do so. I think we were the only bookseller in Britain to do so, and we refused to give in. We wanted to take legal advice of our own. We wanted to take a more measured view about whether this book was libelous or not, and we held out for as long as we could, which was actually some weeks. But at the end we got absolutely buried in threats, and it came to a point where we felt we couldn't risk the sort of sums of money which were being threatened. It was a most unpleasant chapter, I must say.
It wasn't only biographies that got driven off the shelves. Even the Chronicle of the 20th Century found itself being pursued by libel lawyers for an honest mistake.
Well, there were rather fewer references to Robert Maxwell than one used to find in the Daily Mirror when he owned it. Most of them are about, indeed, the publisher and proprietor of the Daily Mirror. Reference here going back to 1968 when he and Rupert Murdoch, the young Rupert Murdoch, locked in battle for ownership of the News of the World. And they're mostly about Robert Maxwell's career, the Robert Maxwell we know and love. But there is one other reference to another Robert Maxwell. 29th of April 1987, Tripoli. Alleged British spy Robert Maxwell is freed on Colonel Gaddafi's orders. That's all it said. But come to the index, and this is where we made a mistake, and the indexer did not distinguish between the two Robert Maxwells. So we've now got both Robert Maxwells put together. They're the one entry for the alleged British spy and the other references to the proprietor all merged as one. Our counsel's advice was that we might well win. He thought we had a sporting chance of winning, but he couldn't guarantee it, of course. He said that if we lost, the damages against us would not be particularly high. They might even be derisory. But even if they were derisory, we might still have to pay Mr. Maxwell's legal costs as well as the derisory damages. So you put in those together with our own costs, you're looking at, he said not less than £150,000.
Fresh from persecuting the Chronicle of the 20th Century, Maxwell turned his attention to the Mail on Sunday, which he was convinced was running a vendetta against him. As usual, a libel writ was soon on the way. But then the tables were turned. When the Mail on Sunday ran a story about Maxwell's antics in the football arena, he denounced the article as a fabrication. And so, Maxwell himself was sued for libel.
Frankly, it's the sort of thing which I would, under any other circumstances, have ignored, because I think that if you're a newspaper man and you're attacked, you must sort of expect that. And not complain too much. Newspaper men do tend to complain too much. But Robert Maxwell is a different category. To be the biter, or to see the biter bit, was very pleasant. And one of the happier days of my life was to hear in court the following. Mr. Maxwell has apologized to the plaintiff, namely myself, and is here today to acknowledge his error and to apologize in open court. He's also agreed to pay substantial damages. Now that was these were very pleasant words to hear.
Robert Maxwell was more at home in his traditional role of plaintiff.
I'm delighted that a jury of 12 men and women of this country upheld the fact that Private Eye is a lying organ, a disgrace to journalism, and a foul imposition on the country.
The allegation was that Maxwell had been giving money to the Labour Party and financing sort of foreign trips by Neil Kinnock, and that there was some suggestion that he was hoping to get a peerage out of it. It seemed to me at the time, and now actually, to be a fairly trivial story. And